Okay, good morning, guys. So first, I have two things I want to say. Number one, I am super proud of the sixth grade. Not only did almost all of you submit your work yesterday, but almost all of you submitted it on time. So that was so amazing, super appreciated by me, the teacher. I'm going to be updating some grades today, so just check Power School later in the evening. I also, number two, want to shout out Pata because he gave me some really nice feedback on the video from yesterday. Even something as simple as telling me, oh, this video works for me, this video doesn't work for me, it really helps me as the teacher understand what you need. So thank you, Pata, for leaving that feedback. It was super helpful. All right, on to today. So today's lesson is actually a 2-day lesson. It's a 2-day lesson. So we're going to begin it today, but you most likely will not finish in one class period. If we were in real life, we wouldn't finish this lesson in one class period. That's why today's lesson is a 2-day lesson, so it will be due tomorrow by 6 p.m. Let's get to the learning target. I will be able to explain the purpose of checks and balances. So checks and balances is obviously our new term here. We don't know what checks and balances are, and I'm not going to tell you. You're going to figure it out through a video that I'm about to play, as well as an activity. I can tell you that checks and balances relate to our three branches of government, not the levels that we learned yesterday, but the branches. So our branches are the legislative, think back to last week, legislative, executive, and judicial. In your RTL, you had to at some point choose which one of these three branches is most important in your opinion, and you had to explain why. So let's really quickly recap what each branch does. Our legislative branch, we know, makes the laws. This is what your storybook from last week concentrated on. You were focused on the legislative branch. The main group in the legislative branch is called Congress. Then we've got the executive branch. The executive branch makes sure, I'll move in a minute, make sure people follow the laws. So the legislative is going to make the laws, and then executive makes sure people actually follow the laws. But the executive has absolutely no power at all to make the laws. This is where the president is. A lot of times people assume the president can make the law. We know from our study of how a bill becomes a law, though, that the president does not have the power to make laws. She only has the power to make sure people follow the laws. Last branch. Our last branch that we study is the judicial. The judicial makes sure laws are fair. The main group in the judicial branch is the Supreme Court. Sometimes the legislative is going to make laws. In American history, the legislative branch has made laws that are gross and unfair. Slavery or segregation are examples of some of America's worst laws that are driven by racism. Sometimes the legislative branch makes laws which are unjust, which are unfair. When that happens, it's the judicial branch that steps in and says, hey, this law is not cool. We got to cancel it out. All in all, though, these three branches work together to get everything done. They all have different jobs. Checks and balances that concept relates to the way these three branches work together. So now let's dive deeper into this term checks and balances because we don't know what it is yet. So now I'm going to play a video for you guys that gives you a nice visual of what checks and balances are, of what that concept means. And after the video, I'm going to go straight into explaining the activity.
Ever heard of checks and balances? No, not for a bank account. The checks and balances I'm talking about are for the US federal government. The Constitution divides the US government into three branches: the legislative, the executive, and the judicial. Each branch has its own job to do. Checks and balances keep each branch of the government from using their job to become too powerful. How? Here's an example. Congress is the legislative branch. It's split into the House and the Senate, so it already has some checks built right in. The main job of Congress is to create bills that one day may be turned into laws. But Congress can't go around making any laws they want and expecting everyone to be okay with it. That's what parents are for, right? So when Congress passes a bill, it goes to the president for approval. As the head of the executive branch, the president can sign the bill into law or veto it. The president's decision is a check on the lawmaking power of Congress. But what if Congress doesn't agree with the president? Congress can override the president's veto if 2/3 of its members vote to do so. Even though this is very difficult to do, it's how Congress is able to check the power of the executive branch. But that's not all. The judicial branch of government, or the Supreme Court, can also check lawmaking power. If a law is challenged in court, a judge might decide that the law is unconstitutional. That's like saying it should have never been made. It can even throw out a law that has gone through Congress and been approved by the president. Now, don't think the Supreme Court's just there to delete everyone else's work. Their power of interpreting law and settling disputes has checks too. For instance, Congress has the power to make an amendment to the Constitution. This is a long and difficult process, but it can make that law they wanted to pass constitutional. In addition, it's the president's duty to select and appoint federal judges. This check prevents the Supreme Court from creating its own rules for selecting judges. That's good because who knows, I might want to be a judge someday. And I don't want somebody making up new rules to stop me. After the president selects a federal judge, the Senate, part of the legislative branch, must approve his choice. This is a check on the executive branch. It makes sure the president isn't picking judges without the Senate's consent. Congress has final say on the number of federal courts and judges. This is another check on the judicial branch's power. The president could do more than pick judges. The president has the power to issue an executive order to deal with some situations, like if there's an emergency. Maybe he needs to send troops overseas to stop a rebellion and rescue Americans in danger. But even executive orders have limits. Only Congress can declare war. That means unless Congress supports the executive order, the troops will eventually be called back. Plus, Congress must approve paying for these actions, so the president can't keep the troops in action if Congress doesn't give him the money. The Supreme Court could rule the executive order to be unconstitutional, just like it could a law. The president is the leader of the executive branch, but if he gets power hungry or starts breaking laws, then the House can vote to impeach. That means bring charges against the president. Once impeached, the president goes on trial. Both the legislative and judicial branch can check the power of the executive through the impeachment process. The Chief Justice of the Supreme Court presides over the trial. The Senate decides whether the president is guilty. This is a serious check. As of 2013, it's only happened twice, and neither was found guilty. One of those presidents was a fan of giving out pardons. Have you ever heard of a pardon? It's like forgiveness. The president has the power to pardon, which is a check on the judicial branch, since the courts can punish criminals. Sometimes the president or other executive leaders can make treaties with other countries, but the Senate must approve any agreement before it's official. If it seems like the president is checked a lot, it's true. From the beginning, Americans needed to be sure no president could take over and abuse their rights. The president can check the legislative branch by calling a special session of Congress. This might be due to an emergency, like the conflict situation I talked about before. Also, the vice president is president of the Senate. He or she can break a tie vote in the Senate. So, do you have this checks and balances thing down? Just remember, being a responsible citizen is super important. Responsible citizens make sure to voice their opinions and make the government work for them. After all, they are the most important check on the government.
So I definitely do not expect you to memorize all of those different checks and balances. Checks and balances are basically rules about what each branch can do to each other. There are a lot of rules, and I do not expect you to remember them all. Remember, in our learning target, we simply wanted to understand the purpose of all of these rules. So the way you're going to get a better sense, a better understanding of the purpose is through today's activity, your checks and balances graphic organizer. Here's what you are going to do. First, you're going to read each scenario. Then you're going to answer the question in the center column. According to your checks and balances chart, which branch of government has the power in this scenario? You will not be able to answer this question unless you use your checks and balances chart. You have to find out what rule within your checks and balances chart relates to this scenario. You've got to figure out which branch had the power in each scenario. After you figure out which branch has the power in each scenario, you're going to answer this question that's highlighted all the way on the right. Does this power seem important to you? Why or why not? Use 2 to 4 sentences to explain. 1-sentence explanations are surface level and will result in deducted points. You've got to explain if the power seems important to you, and you have to explain why. That's at least 2 sentences. We're working in small groups in live class. If you are independent and you begin working independently today, great. If you are feeling kind of confused, make sure you are in live class tomorrow, because live class tomorrow, we will be continuing the same activity. Thanks, guys.